Hello, everybody, and welcome. We are meeting today here from Shaker Museum for the second of our knit-along meetings. We've been working on lessons from a peculiar hat. We have a really special guest today. Laura Sansone is with us to talk about the bioregional textiles and carbon farm network. We're going to have a presentation from her, and then we're going to go ahead and have a conversation about the hat. So the way this is going to be structured is we're going to begin here in spotlight view for the presentation. Catherine, our swell technical help today, will have everybody muted, but you'll be able to unmute yourselves so that when we go into a discussion section later in the meeting, you'll be able to ask questions and participate in the conversation. So we ask that you be careful and try to stay muted during the presentation so everyone can hear. And then that way we'll be able to all chat a little later on. I am so glad to say that we have had continued interest and increasing numbers of folks knitting this hat. I have sent the pattern to Western Australia and Germany and India. So it's very fun to think about Mary Hazard's hat being knit all over the world. And we're really, really grateful for everyone participating. So I want to introduce Laura and let her get started. She is a textile designer, activist, and consultant. She's the creator of the Textile Lab and is currently an assistant professor of textiles at the Parsons School of Design. She's designed woven textiles for Morrow, New York, American Silk Mills, and Burlington House Fabrics. And she's going to tell us all about everything else she does. And welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you so much, Susie. It's a pleasure to be here with the Shaker Museum community. Excited to share my work with everyone. Thank you for that introduction. And I want to also just mention that, you know, I'm a part-time assistant professor of textiles at Parsons School of Design, where I teach classes that have to do really with design thinking and specifically systems thinking in terms of like how do we kind of shift our human systems to address climate change and you know, and socioeconomic problems that we have as we move into the future. And of course, everything that I teach is inflected with like a strong material focus particularly around textiles and clothing, because that's the work that I do. So I'm also a Fibershed affiliate. And for those of you who don't know about Fibershed is an international nonprofit organization that consists of affiliates all over the world. And their main mission is to grow regional textile systems all over the world that have a strong focus on climate beneficial practices. And I'm going to get into that a little bit more in my presentation. So I'm going to just go ahead and get started. Oops. I've also, you know, I've studied textiles all my adult life, and I did work in the industry as a woven designer, but I'm now very involved with knitwear.
Should I bring down my computer?
I think somebody has their mic unmuted.
Jane, you need to mute.
Thank you. Sorry. Because of the kind of work that I'm doing and the types of yarns that I'm creating in small batch, they lend themselves better to developing knitwear. There's less waste, but I'll get into that a little bit later as well. So New York Textile Lab connects farmers and designers together. That's one of our main missions. We grow bioregional textile networks, and we promote carbon farming. Carbon farming is a big focus, and I've been building a network of independent designers like myself who are really forming a purchasing cooperative around supporting this super important environmental mission about carbon farming. I also develop yarns and textiles that are sourced and manufactured all within 300 miles of New York City. So for me, it's really important to start to look at our textile systems and really change the shape of them. And one way that I do that is, you know, I'm very interested in moving the designer to the beginning of the value chain of clothing, of our clothing and textiles. Typically, designers don't enter that value chain when they're buying yarns from a distributor, or they enter the value chain even later when they're purchasing like fabric from a supplier. So it doesn't make sense for us, even any designers and makers, to enter that value chain so late in the game, because there are all these moments of intervention along the way where we could be making decisions about who we're partnering with and you know, the types of materials we're investing in, particularly when we speak about, you know, the environment and caring for the environment. So moving designers to the beginning of the value chain already starts to change the shape of it. It puts us connected directly to farms, to the sources, you know, of where our materials come from. The other way I'm looking at changing the textile economy is really changing the growth logic. I mentioned the purchasing cooperative a minute ago, and I'm super interested in moving from a more centralized growth logic, which, you know, it inherently is the way our current economic system grows, into these centralized systems that tend to consolidate economic resources. I'm interested in growing a more distributed economy that lifts up multiple stakeholders, multiple small farms, multiple independent designers. So that's really why I've you know, made this decision to help to grow our textile economy in a way where it's cooperatively governed, and where you know, we're working with smaller farms. Our region here in the Northeast, as many of you are familiar with, also lends itself to small scale production. Oops. So I just wanted to frame what bioregional textiles mean. This is a map from the USDA that shows the ecoregions across the United States. So it shows regions that aren't defined by political boundaries or economic boundaries, but instead by natural boundaries. So you know, what's really important is that we start to move away from these linear systems, which is largely how our clothing and textile systems operate on. You know, they're about extraction, consumption, and waste largely. And of course, I mentioned the centralized growth logic, or siloed. You know, you think of things that are more vertically integrated. So we have to start looking at the way nature grows, which is in a much more circular system that promotes interdependencies. I mean, that's how natural systems evolve. So when we start to consider ecosystems or bioregions, we can start to consider designing within the capacities and limitations of these ecosystems. So maybe we're working with natural dyes that come from a certain region, or of course, local fiber, which I know many of you on this call are interested in working with, or if you don't already work with local fiber. It's really important. Of course, another thing that is important that I just spoke about is restoring rather than depleting natural systems. And when we work within these small bioregional networks, it's easier to pivot and be able to work within smaller communities and smaller networks. And it's also, we have an opportunity to implement these environmental practices like carbon farming. And I'm going to talk to you a little bit more about what carbon farming means, but it's a way for us to really address the environment when we're really looking at our immediate natural resources. So carbon farming, and this photograph, by the way, it's taken from an event on a farm that one of the farms that's part of our carbon farm network, one of our larger alpaca farms that I work with. Every year we have something called a carbon farm tour, and we run this in tandem with an event that happens in New York City and in the greater state of New York, called New York Textile Month. And it's a month-long festival that celebrates textiles. So we take advantage of that month-long festival, and we always run this carbon farm tour in tandem with that. And we invite makers and designers to come to this farm and to hear about what climate beneficial practices mean, what carbon farming means. Designers and makers get to look through yarns that we have available, and textiles, and pet alpaca. It's a beautiful event. So you're seeing, that's what you're seeing here. You're seeing some visitors to a farm called Little Creek Farm Alpacas. They're in the lower Hudson Valley, North Salem region. And the gentleman who's holding the tuft of grass with soil attached to it is Gibson Durnford, who was up until now acting as our carbon farm planner. Okay, so he's an agricultural planner. He has a degree in environmental science. His day job is with the Watershed Agricultural Council. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Watershed Agricultural Council, acronym WAC, they are an organization that evolved in the 1980s. They were established because there was recognition that the farming operations in the Catskill and Hudson Valley region were actually polluting the watershed and the reservoirs that serve, the 9 million people in New York City. So something had to be done to kind of shift the practices on these farms to best management practices. And so WAC was born, and it's funded by New York City, and they give farms in the Hudson Valley region funding and consultation around how to implement these practices on their farms. Now, these practices for water quality health are very similar for carbon sequestration. So carbon farming are like on the farm practices that are designed to reduce, sequester, and mitigate greenhouse gases, and to store carbon into the plant matter and soils. So it's about drawing carbon out of the atmosphere, because all farming is going to release carbon up into the atmosphere, right? Anytime you disturb the soil. And the reason why we have our carbon cycle is thrown off, and so much of our activity is adding to climate change, is because we were over extracting from our earth, through all of our agricultural practices and our clothing and textile practices. So we see soil as one of the biggest mitigators, of climate change, if we can all shift to what we call BMPs, best management practices on our farms, these climate beneficial practices. So I brought this program here through Fibershed, of which I'm an affiliate. I'm the New York Fibershed affiliate. And Gibson started working with us pro bono. And he can no longer do that because he's so busy at WAC. So I'm happy to announce that we just got USDA funding. The funding is called Climate Smart Commodities Grant funding. We partnered with other organizations nationwide, and we got a piece of the funding to hire 2 part-time agricultural planners to help us continue to grow our carbon farming, because our purchasing cooperative that I mentioned, the designers, the independent designers I'm working with, our mission is really to support this carbon farming, and to use fibers that come from these farms to make our clothing and textiles. So these are just a list of various climate beneficial practices that happen on farms, and of course each farm is different. So and the farm, if you look nationally, the farms or the ranches that are out on the west coast of this country are using different practices than what we use here, because they have different issues. It's more dry out there. They need more windbreaks applications probably to keep topsoil from blowing away. We have a wetter environment here. We do a lot of composting protocols. So, every farm is different. Every region is different. So again, this is what's really interesting about bioregional development, because you're really looking at the needs of a region. We're moving to a more needs-based assessment of what we should be doing, rather than just looking at money and profit, which is super important. This is the New York State Regional Yarn Source Book. I developed this about 5 years ago with a researcher from Cornell University, who I met at a textile conference. We were both presenting research about regional fiber in New York State, and the woman's name is Helen Trejo. And I invited her to work on this project with me. We both got funded through the schools that we're affiliated with. I mentioned I teach at Parsons. So I got New School. Parsons is under the umbrella of the New School. So I received New School funding to work on this book. I had a research assistant and a design assistant, and we put together this book, and it's meant to be an industry tool to connect designers and farmers together. So this was one of the first things that I really tackled, to bring designers and farmers closer together, this analog sort of book that you can flip through and see hand knit swatches of the farms. We just chose a sliver of the over 300 farms that we had identified in New York State. And of course the farms, this is like I think of it as a living document that changes all the time. We're constantly editing it because farms close, they go out of business, and then new farms come on board as well. And we're also, when we first made this book, it was really a snapshot of what farms are already making. So a lot of the farms, as many of you know, create added value products. So they're making their own skeins of yarn. So we used what the farms are already making. So, we didn't collect fiber and make yarn, our own yarn from their fiber. We said, well, what are you already making? And we took, some reelings from their skeins, and we made knit swatches, and so that's what you're looking at. And then included in this book is also a description of the farms, and there's some specs that go along with the book, so that people who are interested in purchasing fiber understand if the farms are selling wholesale, if they the prices of their fiber, what kind of fiber, the micrometer count. We tried to get a lot of information outlined in this book. And I wanted to show this to this audience because we always need help knitting swatches. So we could talk a little bit about that later, but I know that there are probably a lot of really fast knitters on this call. So that's something that could be of interest if anyone is interested in supporting what we're doing. But this is another page of the book. This is one of our farms, or one of our smaller alpaca farms that signed on to our climate beneficial programming, the carbon farming that we're doing. And this graphic image that you're looking at is from Fibershed. They developed this, and this is their verification symbol, and this is what they're using with their brands to indicate, that the farms that we're working with are practicing these BMPs, these best management practices, to draw down carbon. So the carbon farming is also something that evolves. Okay, it's not like one day you're not a carbon farmer and the next day you are. It's sort of like you go through an application process, and then there's a transition to actually sequestering the carbon. And we use We use software tools from the USDA to actually matriculate the amount of carbon that's being sequestered. There are soil tests that have to happen. So there are a lot of things that happen, to get to this verification. But the goal is to get lots of farms signed on. And of course, for me, I'm very interested in the smaller farms. So these are the farms in our Carbon Farm Network. We have 10 of them so far. They're at different stages of application into our program. There are a few who we've done metrics on the farm, and they've had soil testing done. Many of them are they've just applied. We are buying fiber from them, so this is why we're just so thrilled about the USDA support, because this really helps us to get these farms completely integrated into this carbon farming practice. This is Wedding Hill Farm. I might be even some people on this call might have even recognized some of the farms that we're partnering with. Wedding Hill, they're up in they're near Greenwich, New York. So what I recognized a long time ago, that we had a lot of Romney in our region. So we have a certain type of wool here, and many of you already know this, but it's a coarser wool. Like, we don't have the fine wool breeds that thrive out on the west coast of this country, like where it's much drier. We do have one really wonderful merino farm that I love, that is in our book, but we don't have a lot. The coarser wools do better, and they the Romneys particularly are dual purpose sheep, so a lot of farmers like to breed them. So from the Southern Adirondack Wool Pool, I recognize this. I had looked at some data from them in terms of like how much wool was coming into the wool pool. And so I said, well, let's take the fiber that we have, which might be a little scratchier, and let's try to like pass it as like softer like yarn, So I started blending it with alpaca, because we actually have a lot of alpaca growers in our region also. So I'm blending this Romney wool with alpaca to soften the hand, and also to color the yarn. So we're not using any dyes here. So going back to this idea of thinking about how our human systems can start to like ape our natural systems, we want to look at circularity. So a soil to soil system is it refers to when things can grow out of the soil, be processed in a safe way, and then return to the soil. And that's what we're trying to do. And if you're not introducing synthetic dyes, of course, that's a benefit, right, to keeping things circular. So on the left is one of the larger alpaca farms, Little Creek Farm Alpaca. They are the farm where we have our annual carbon farm tour. You saw that picture a little bit earlier. And on the right is Faraway Farm Alpaca, and you can see some of the beautiful colors. And of course, Lita, the farmer there, she sells added value, she has a yarn store on the premises of her farm, and she sells really beautiful skeins of her own fiber. And then a lot of you know about these. I'm not going to spend a tremendous amount of time on this, because plenty of you know, I think, the general way yarn is processed, especially regional yarn. But I just want to let you know that, our purchasing cooperative, we're working with about between 600 and 800 pounds of fiber that we're buying and processing, which is like small batch production. I mean, it's not a ton, but when you start to get up to 800 pounds, it's like hard to process it here. Okay. Because our goal, remember, is to create textiles and clothing that are all processed within 300 miles of New York City. So that becomes quite the challenge, especially when we don't have a lot of infrastructure left, because as many of you understand that, we've been outsourcing all of our manufacturing systems for decades now. So we have very little infrastructure left. So it's quite the challenge to go from this very small scale, which might be 150 pounds to 200 pounds to like, you know, then scaling up to 800 pounds. So anyway, so the scouring is something that's hard for us because we don't really have proper scouring here. So these are a few of the places that we partner with to scour. Now, the nice thing about partnering with multiple like partners like this is that, again, it kind of distributes the economic benefit, right? So more people are involved, it helps to support more small businesses. Some of these, the Hudson Valley Sheep and Wool Company, unfortunately, they don't do, now they're not working with us anymore because they've closed their mill. But I still am getting things washed at Rosehaven and Bartlett. We have used them. This past year for the 2022 yarn production, we actually did send some of our fiber down to Chargers. We piggybacked it on to with some larger amounts from Battenkill Fiber because we had our yarns processed there. But you know, it's just really important to try to lift up many small businesses. For me anyway, that's my ethos, you know. And this just shows the fiber drying on the racks. Many of you have probably seen this. I mean, it's basically hand washed, a lot of it. And you know, so we're kind of spreading that labor out among many people. I borrow trucks. I do a lot of the schlepping around of the fiber. So, and hopefully that will change in the future. Like we'll get people to actually deliver for us as our network grows, as our purchasing cooperative becomes more robust. But for now, I'm doing a lot of the heavy lifting, or it's not so heavy because it's fiber. But anyway, on the left you see a picture of my VW Beetle that is stuffed literally. Like I couldn't even use the stick shift on it when I picked up all this fiber. It was quite full. And you know, we're renting trucks and borrowing trucks just to bring the fiber and deliver it. And of course, these are mills that we have that can scale up to a little beyond what the mini mills can do, really, because you know, as I said, it's like we're processing about 800 pounds, which isn't a lot compared to the work that California Fibershed is doing. I mean, they're moving 900,000 pounds of fine next to skin soft Rembouillet and Cormo and Merino wool through to market, you know, every year. I mean, so, and they're partnering with large brands. But you know, what I'm doing is really different. It's really about this idea of small batch and you know, working with these smaller players. So these are just some pictures of the processing. A carder. I think this is at Kramer. These pictures are mostly from Kramer, I believe, in Pennsylvania. Of the spinning mill. So you see, it's a bigger mill than the mini mills that we have in the Northeast. And this is some picture of our yarn that we're making commercial grade yarn. It's a 50-50 blend of alpaca and wool. We're using a lot of Romney. We're using some downy breeds like Shropshire and Dorset. But it's primarily like the wool that it has to be a certain length. It has to be a certain quality. We like the lower micrometer counts because of course we're making clothing, a lot of sweaters. So it helps to have that lower micrometer count. But as low as it can be with those breeds. But anyway, this just shows some of the colors. So every year we're making 50-50 blend. We're making a singles yarn. So our purchasing cooperative is really only making one kind of yarn because it took years of R&D to get to this point, honestly. Like we're on year 4 now. And we've gone through major catastrophes. Like it's not easy for the mills to work with the local fiber. It's not easy for manufacturers to work with what they call farm yarn, you know. So because there's a lot of vegetable matter in it, especially because we're not using commercial scouring facilities, you know. So that's there are some hurdles, you know, but everybody's been really trying to work like cooperatively and patiently with one another. I mean, it's, you know, it doesn't go without stress, but it's definitely, you know, it's happening and we're moving forward. So we make a singles yarn, and it is compatible with knitting machines. And we're hoping it can go on, the singles can work well on the looms too. I mean, we know if it can't work for a warp, we know we can use it for fill, you know, for the weft. But anyway, these are the places where we're manufacturing our textiles. Simply Knitting Mills is in Queens. They do a lot of our sweaters for our network. New Jersey Knitting, we're working with we're doing some blankets and they're doing the manufacturing on that. And Frog Creek is making our socks. And this is basically the footprint of our regional fiber. So it's truly hyper regional. So it's truly bioregional development, you know, that we're looking at. And of course, you know, we're being mindful of the carbon footprint and not shipping. The idea is that we're not shipping things across the country, you know, as much as possible. Like I said, we had to go down to the Carolinas, to Chargers to get things scoured this year, but it was only half of our batch. So yeah, we do our best. We're all trying our hardest. These are designers in our Carbon Farm network, including New York Textile Lab, which, you know, I'm a trained designer. And we're all working to purchase this fiber. This is wool hide. It's their she calls this her sweatshirt sweater. It's a beautiful sweater that she developed. Vincent James made this stunning duster, just really gorgeous. She's selling these. This is Christina Wong, who isn't fully in our network, but I like to show this because she did something so innovative. This is more of like a one-off piece, but it's a gorgeous application of the local wool. This is a lining. So she did a tufted lining. That's what you're looking at in this jacket. And I just adore it. It's really quite beautiful and innovative, I find. So it's also a different construction because it's tufted, which I find interesting. These are, this is my work. I collaborate with a group called, a design group called Plia. They are, they're a product and interior designers. And this is a sort of high-end luxury blanket that we made, a herringbone blanket. It's very heavy. It's like over 4 pounds. Like it's like very weighty and gorgeous. This is a lighter weight seed stitch blanket that I developed with them. And these are just some of my products, some of the socks and beanies, and I'm wearing one of my raglan sweaters right now. More of the beanies. Remember that the none of the fibers, all of the colors come from the animals. None of the fibers have been dyed. So we get variation in color every year too. And I'm just so proud of my network of designers because they've really been able to be flexible and to tell, because some of them sell wholesale, and they've been able to tell their buyers, like, look, you know, and their customers, even their direct to market customers, they say like, the brown will be a different shade next year, you know, and in a way it makes it much more special. So, you know, I can talk a little bit more about like this shift that we have to really undergo in order to really change our clothing and textile systems, but a lot of it has to do with the end user too, the consumer, and having them shift out of this fast fashion model. More of my raglan sweaters, and this is a picture on the right of my cropped sweater that I've made, and some checkered beanies, and there's the cropped sweater. It has a waffle knit on it. It's really cute. And this is what our checkered beanie in our 3 colors. And there's some of our socks. So it took a long time to get to this point where we were really able to you know, make commercial yarn and make it like feasible to market, to bring it to market. And this is just some woven development that we did early on, and we want to like revisit woven soon. Our network does. We're all quite interested in that, and there's other woven development happening, regional woven development happening in New York. So we want to take advantage of that. And that was my last slide. And you can look at, you know what, it might be a good idea to just quickly go here, maybe. I wanted to just show you, this is my website, and this is how the farms apply for carbon farming. There's an application process. This is the forward-facing page that asks just general information about their farm. They submit this, and then they go to another area where they continue their application, and there are lots of other forms that they fill out, just about grazing management, water, like their water management and whatnot. And then of course we have a fiber processing and marketing form that asks them if they're willing to sell wholesale and how much, and will they sell their fibers for. So I want to invite you all to go to my website and check it out. I have a publications area here. You can look at some of the lectures from the Carbon Farm Tours. And this part here has to do with, we're developing an app to help to coordinate the activities in our carbon farm network, and to grow things in a distributed way. So it becomes more difficult when you centralized efficiencies of scale work very well with centralized systems. But what we're trying to do is we're trying to create efficiencies of interdependence where people work together cooperatively. And of course that becomes harder to coordinate. So we're developing an app for that. And you could look, you could look at our products and whatnot here. And I think that is it. So I'm going to stop my share and maybe just open up to a few questions. How are we doing with time, Susie? I don't want to eat too much into your time, because I know you need time with your
Thank you. I think we are doing well with time, and I would be very surprised if people didn't have questions. I know I have a few. So thank you. And I do think that we likely have a very knowledgeable audience with us today, but just in case, I wonder, you were talking, when you're talking specifically about the breeds that thrive on different parts of the country, it might be useful if we have any new knitters or new fiber enthusiasts with us to talk a little bit specifically about what a micrometer measurement is or does. And also I know I have friends who farm in this area, and I thought it might be interesting to talk a little bit about why some breeds do better here. I mean, I know that I have friends who've just said that Romney's, like, their feet don't get infected, and because it's wet here, then you don't have to pay for the vet to come all the time. And I think that kind of specificity might be interesting. So, but the micrometer I think would be important to know.
Yeah, no, you're right on that. I've heard the same thing. I mean, and of course, I am not a farmer. I mean, I like to learn from my farmers and learn more about, I think that's one of the really important aspects of what I'm trying to do, is bringing the designer to the beginning of that value chain, so that we have this more like empathic kind of connection where we're understanding like it's very hard to be a farmer. It's not easy. Our farmers work within very tight margins, and so anyway, I have heard that's the word on the street about Romneys too, is that the hooves, they don't get foot rot or hoof rot, and I think there are some issues around fly strike too, that I think it might be because of the wetness here. Because the merinos, the finer wool breed sheep, they have a lot of folds in their rear end area, and fly strike is when flies lay eggs, in this dirty areas of the fleece, and it can really be horrible for a flock, get very devastated from something like fly strike. So that was another thing. But in terms of micrometer count refers to the diameter of the fiber itself. So the finer, the lower the count, the finer the diameter. So when you're looking at like merinos, the fine wools, they're like, like a 20 or 21 or 23. And the Romneys can be much higher, like in the low 30s or even a little coarser. So so that's the challenge, is to change that hand. But we're making some really lovely yarn by blending with the alpaca. And of course the alpaca, I think everyone understands that alpaca is soft, with a low micrometer count. I mean, we're not using prime alpaca, we're using grade 2 and 3 because it doesn't make sense to, I mean, there's something about blending too. Like if you blend something super fine with something super coarse, you can get like weird pilling. And I mean, I'm learning a lot about also just like, fiber quality and the length of things and how it really impacts the final outcome of the yarn. And there are steps all along the way. I mean, through the processing that will, including the scouring. I mean, that's a big one too, getting rid of all that vegetable matter. That it all impacts the end result of that yarn.
I think what I find most amazing about your project is it involves so much really 10,000 foot systems thinking about changing from an economy of scale system where everything is centralized to trying to change that. And sometimes it comes down to the vegetable matter, which is how much burdock have you pulled out of your pasture so it doesn't end up stuck to the sheep, right? I mean, because you can't wash it out. It's
That's
really
beautiful. It's a great way. Thank you for that illustration of that. This is exactly the problem. Sometimes we simply can't take fiber from certain farmers because it's just too dirty. Like it will never get clean. And a lot of that also has to do, like the burdock is a good one. Like that's like a big problem. But then also like it's also if like the sheep are eating from if the hay is mounted above the sheep and they're getting lots of hay on them when they are feeding, like that can also lead to issues. And also like when they're sheared and how they're sheared, and like if the fiber gets really dirty on the floor, like it gets a lot of hay in it, there are a lot of things that are impacting. So it's like it's every step of the way is really important.
That is an impressive thing to take on. Is there a sense that do the biodynamic practices help those practical considerations, or do they sometimes work against each other? I mean, I know there are a lot of the different practices, but
you mean the bio, like working a bioregional system? Is that what you mean?
No, I was thinking about some of like the soil mitigation practices, some of those very specific things. Does some of that take away some of the mechanisms that might have let things sort of get messy or casual and have the sheep be dirtier, or do they support each other, or do they work against each other?
I love that, the way you're thinking. And I don't think a lot of those carbon drawdown practices actually impact the vegetable matter, or like those those are really farm management. Those are animal management practices that we're talking about, like keeping the fiber cleaner and all of that. And what you're feeding your animal. I mean, they could tie together. I mean, everything connects to everything, I mean,
the point,
right. So, it could, I mean, I'm sure the fiber is impacted from the type of pasture management, right? And like what the animals are eating and I mean, all of that is really important. So, but I don't, but I want to say that Gibson Durnford, our ag planner, he was saying he wanted to make that like a best management practice for the fiber for the yarn development, like have like like a how you actually do the shearing, and do, once the fiber, once the animal gets to a certain point with growing that fleece, like then you start like moving into this realm of like, how is that managed, right? Because that's going to come off of that animal, and it's going to have to be put into a bag and taken to like a scouring facility. So it's really important to, it's something that needs to be addressed, I think, more in what we call BMPs, best management practices.
Well, and I'm sure it's really valuable for a lot of farmers to begin to have a source to go to learn, because as I said, there are a lot of new farmers, and people are learning as people are retiring, and it's very impressive. I'm hoping, I'm sort of keeping an eye on the chat, and if other people have questions for Laura, I hope you'll go ahead and toss them in there. I did want to revisit very quickly too, that if anybody's interested in knitting some swatches, if you're near enough by, if you're sort of local, so it's sort of standard postage, and you're interested, Laura, do you want to maybe put some contact information in the chat?
Sure.
So that people could reach out to you if they're interested in doing that, and that might be a fun way to take part in this neat thing. I am so appreciative of you being here. When I think about one of the things that interests me, we so often think of the Shakers as, of course, they were first and foremost a spiritual community. And to us, they're so meaningful because so many of the values they lived by and practices are really meaningful to many of us today. There was gender equality, there was inclusion of all races and all abilities. We can see, evidence of walkers and wheelchairs and accommodations being made so that Shakers could work. But they were also, it's really important to remember, were entrepreneurs. They were business people, because they were supporting their own large chosen families themselves. It was a big responsibility, and they quickly realized that things they could do well at a scale to serve their own needs, they could make a business out of and make money to be able to serve themselves. And we're also generous charitable givers to spread it further. So I think it's in a great spirit to celebrate the work that you're doing, because it is a very different, it's fundamentally a different way to look at what you can produce and take care of your community, rather than simply to centralize it all and make it as cheap and efficient as possible. So,
Well, thank you. Thank you. And I love that kind of those alignments that you're making, and I think that this idea of cooperative, something this cooperative work ethic is something that the Shakers had, as well, which is so great. So it's really important. Like, we have to think collectively more as we move into the future to tackle these really pressing problems, issues that we have. So, yeah.
Well, thank you. I'm so pleased to learn a lot, and interested to, Christmas shop and see about all your. Oh, I know one more thing I wanted to ask was, do I imagine that your products are available as finished products and not as patterns that hand knitters might knit? Is that correct?
Right, because what we're doing is trying to scale production systems in a distributed way, in a decentralized distributed way. So that involves mechanizing production. So we're not I do sell some hand knit skeins, like when I sell a lot of things at like pop-up markets. I like to sell at on farms. Like I sell at Churchtown Dairy often, like they have their harvest events and their holiday markets and things like that. So and I sell at the farmers markets down in the lower Hudson Valley. I sell sweaters there, so for me, I really, my work really started with a partnership between myself and Grow NYC in New York City. where I started working in which is the citywide green market system there. So for me, and I started doing that. I started using the Grow My Say Green Market as a laboratory for conducting research and looking at how we could build these interdependencies in our production systems, and demonstrate like circular systems, like, you could harvest for dyes at the market, and you could work with the fiber from the added value product from the meat producers who were selling there, like their fiber, and you could spin that, and then when I say we, I mean my students and I, like, we worked with wearable collections, like the used clothing collectors there, and we would make dyes, and we would compost the leftovers, like in the compost collection there. So for me, working in a small market venue like that is like super, super appealing. And I was always like, there's this thing at the green market or the farmer's market, when you go there every week, you see the farmer and they hand you the product, like, which is like an apple or like a bunch of radishes, and you see the person behind, you understand where that product came from. And I always felt like, why can't we be selling our clothing in a market like this? Like, why can't we have that happen, even though there are all these steps along the way to get from the raw material to the finished product? Why can't we be selling rugs and socks and sweaters? So for me, like, selling next to producers, like selling next to the farmers, is really important.
That is, and I'm sure you're understanding why it's so challenging to do it that way, but kudos for overcoming it. We do have a question about whether there are plans for native dye usage, possibly in the future.
I love that. So thank you for that question. I teach natural dyeing. I mean, I love it. I think there's potential for it in a bioregional way. Like, I don't think it makes sense to try to scale natural dyeing to meet the needs of the industry, because then we're going to end up just like monoculturing, things, and monoculturing plants or whatever. So, but I think in small batch applications, like natural dyes is really, there's a lot of potential for it. And I particularly love native, like I have in my studio right now, I have acorn. I took my yarn, and I developed dyes with acorns and lichen, things, because I live right now in a wooded area, so I'm pulling from my environment. I mean, there are many things that make like beautiful natural dyes like that, that are growing here that we could be using. So I love that idea, and I think it's really I think there's like really a lot of potential for it. It's just that, like, you have right now, it's really hard to go from, like, I showed you those cones of yarn, like, in order to go from a cone, like, in order to dye something, you have to go from a cone to a skein and then back to a cone to put it on a machine right now with the value chain that we have set up to make our products. So that's like a huge labor cost, to go from a cone to a skein and dye it and then go back to a cone. Yeah, but we do have the potential to be dyeing like garments, like things that are already constructed. I mean, it has a different look than dyeing things in the wool, so to speak, but but you can do it. And I have some like socks that I've been dyeing, like these are some of my socks. I don't know if you can see, but I was like they're dyed with lichen and acorns. So I was like dip dyeing them, so I'm playing with different like colors, that might be compatible with my naturally colored yarns.
Very cool. Very cool. Okay, well, thank you so much again.
Yeah,
you're welcome. Well, I think we'll ask if Catherine could maybe take us out of spotlight so that everybody who's joining us today can be part of the conversation. And then we also have, I think I saw on our participant list today, that Roxanne Richardson is with us. Roxanne really helped us get this kicked off because she has a podcast that she mentioned us on, and I know a lot of people found us through that. And Roxanne and I have had a little some conversation about the pattern. I don't know, maybe she's not with us anymore. Is she with us?
Izzy, I think I'm gonna head out. Well, if you're
Okay.
programming now, okay?
All
But
right. Thanks.
I wanted to say thank you, everybody, again, and it was a pleasure to be here and share my work.
Okay. Thank you so much.
Thanks so much.
Thank you. And I think I don't have, and I think Roxanne was not able to stay all the way through, and she mentioned she might not be, but she had been working on the pattern, and she had asked me about some of the decreases and increases. And I know that, as always, there are really, really experienced and talented knitters in the room. And I wonder if any of you had questions or comments about how the decreases in pattern are going. And I would invite you to unmute and jump in, and let's talk about that.
I know for me, I had to change a number of numbers. So I started my cast on with 148 instead of 146, so that the ribbing would be even and there wouldn't be like 4 rows of just knits in the back. Because when I looked at your photos from the museum, I didn't see that. So I knew I needed to go down.
I think that's probably a correction, and thank you.
And then then of course, because I added 2, I had to adjust everything. But when I got to the buttonhole, I decided only to do a 4-stitch buttonhole, and I'm going to put like a horn button on instead because it's just a little more modern. But then when I got to the brim, the numbers didn't add up either, and the brim was going to be like on the side, like it was offset. So I had to change the numbers for that to make it symmetrical. I'm not sure why it wasn't, because even with the original numbers, if you knit 42 and then bind off 50, you had more than 42 on the other side. So I don't know if anybody noticed that besides me.
I don't know either, because I had a couple people send me, they may have just been being very tactful and sent me completed hats, and they didn't look lopsided. But thank you for catching that and for making those adjustments. One of the things I always wonder about these shaker pieces is Mary Hazard would have been in her 80s and knitting her whole life. And as I do these things, I wonder, and when we did the rugs with Elvira Hewlett last year, I sort of wonder if they even had a written pattern or if they just knew what they were doing. You know, they just kind of knew what their gauge was and knew how big a hat they wanted to make. And when they wanted to decrease it, they started decreasing. I think it's a different approach. And so it's really nice. Jessie, I see you wave.
Yeah, I can't figure out the brim instructions, and I don't know if I'm doing it, is the opening supposed to get put back together when you're doing the brim, or does it stay open? I can't quite figure it out.
It sort of comes through the brim, so that you could actually, the hat is something you could use almost as a balaclava. So if you unbutton it, you can pull it down.
Okay, but I'm doing the brim on the wrong part, so it needs to be on the hat part and not on the. Okay,
correct.
that's not clear in the pattern.
Thank you.
I
That's
agree.
another thing.
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was looking at that too going, wait, what? I thought we were going to use that as some kind of marker to know where to put the brim or something. Like, why was the hole there? I got it now. Thank you.
Excellent. Okay. Yes. Thank you. I think we probably just assumed looking at the because of the picture. But that's a great thing to add in there.
Yeah, you couldn't
check
tell
the numbers
from the picture that's how it worked. Yeah.
Check numbers and brim top of opening.
So really you're holding when you say you're starting the single crochet with the right side facing, but you're also holding the hat upside down.
That's a great way to do it. Thank you.
Yes, so you're working across there. Okay.
And I don't, so that is, I did hold mine upside down, and that's the way I would do it. If there's anybody who knows of a different way, or for instance, I'm not enough of a crocheter to know, but if you crocheted from the back side, would you then would you do it right side up? Like, I just don't know if there are other ways to get to the same thing. And if anybody has done it a different way, I would just invite you to share it.
Okay. You know, it's quite,
ask
it's quite a large hat. But
Mhm.
because the decreases happen so fast, it's going to kind of sit on, you know, this part is quite big.
Mhm. So one of the things I think is so interesting is it was a worn reverse engineering from something that was made and worn for many years.
Yeah,
It seems to me the proportions of the whole thing appear to me now to be a little odd, right?
yeah,
So that, because it's very stretched out, the ribbing on the hat in the collection looks almost like it was just blocked. And
Yeah.
then it seems shallow in relation to how wide the brim is. So honestly, my guess is that it shrunk, right? Whenever I've tried to wash or felt something, I lose a lot more vertically than
yes,
laterally. So
yes.
my guess is that it probably wasn't that much bigger, because it seems a reasonable length for an adult hat, maybe a little short, but wide. So my guess is that it shrunk and then got stretched back out. I also think the ear flaps are a little odd. Like if you've knit the hat so it fits, then the ear flaps are kind of under your ears. Right? Does anybody else finding that, or?
Haven't done that part yet. So
But-
it's probably better to put it on your head and then mark where you want the flaps to be.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
okay.
Is Jane still on the call? Jane Kivlin? I don't know if there you are. I saw her head at the Greater Milwaukee Knitting Guild meeting, and it seemed to me that the ear flaps are further back than her ears.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah, there's Jane's hat.
There, yeah, they are a little far back.
Yeah, Jane
So
and
I
I are
didn't-
both found out about this program through the Greater Milwaukee Knitting Guild newsletter. And I don't know if there's any other Milwaukeeans on the call, but
That's very fun. Well, and please thank them. I would love to thank them for that. I think that's great fun. And that's interesting.
I am just starting knitting this. I sort of joined in late because I only found out about this through Ravelry
Mhm.
a little bit ago. And I'm sort of still piecing my way through, so I'm not, at any of these stages yet, but I was thinking of doing a brim, on a smaller needle size, like I'm used to doing for anything that's ribbed,
Mhm.
and seeing how that does. But one thing with the ear flaps to consider might be, at least I know from I'm not sure how much overlap there is with Quaker and Shaker, but the ear flaps might have acted more as a like fastening rather than specifically covering the ears. Might be something to consider in the way that like caps would be tied.
Interesting. There no, I wonder the way I would be tempted to use them now would be as like something you could tie, or like
Yeah,
add
I
a
just think
tassel,
of
but-
like bonnets from that period that have usually they're tied like under the chin, or like a deer stalker would be tied under the chin, but it doesn't look like the pattern has any attachments for cord or anything like that. So
No,
I
it doesn't. And it may well have, and nor do I see a place where there might have been one that was removed.
yeah,
But you never know. I see some things in the chat. I will work on these corrections in the pattern and happy to publish and just send to everybody who signed up what those revisions might be. There was a community group on Ravelry that I started a few years ago just to let people know about it. And I haven't had time to manage the group. So honestly, maybe Sullivan, is there an ongoing chat happening right now about Ravelry?
the way I found it was through one of the historical knitting patterns groups. It wasn't necessarily really a dedicated,
Okay.
this museum and this. There's several of them, and one was just mentioning it. And since I'm, a Quaker here in Maryland, I found it very interesting. But not really an active knit along group or anything.
Okay, so there's not one that sometimes it was very funny. The first year I did it, I put together a community group, and I did it before I put together all the other promotional stuff, thinking I was just getting ahead of it. And I left it for about a week. And when I came back, I was way late to my own party, because I'm always amazed and warmed by the enthusiasm of knitters, and everybody else, like people had independently explained how to sign up. Somebody else had independently run the whole thing. I was very grateful. So for all I know, those things are happening again. So
Susie,
Mhm.
During Stitches West, or no, sorry, Stitches SoCal that just happened recently, I took a class with Franklin Habit. I don't know if you're familiar with him. And he's a knitwear historian, and that's a passion of his, and a lot of his followers on Patreon are as well. So I gave him all of your contact information and the information about this knit along, for him to be able to contact you, because he said he would love to share that with his Patreon group, because they're like-minded people who would enjoy something like this. So you may or may not like get all of a sudden an influx of inquiries.
These things take on a life of their own sometimes, and I'm every time it happens, I'm mostly delighted for Mary Hazard, the Shaker sister, who never would have thought that her hat was going to have such a life beyond her. And thank you for Jane for letting us know about that. One of your ancestors joined the Shakers after having children. Thank you. That's really interesting. We have our director of collections, Jerry Grant, often receives calls from people who have been working on their genealogy or have items in their family that they're able to trace to family members who spent time with Shakers. The Shakers also, although they lived apart from the world at large, they also they were not completely isolated, and there were a lot of people who lived sort of Shaker adjacent lives and interacted with the Shakers either because they worked for them or they purchased things from them. So it's always interesting to see how those connections come up. And I thought someone tried. I saw you try on your hat. It looked good. Somebody was at the trying on stage. That was fun. All right. Well, I think we're getting there. And Molly looking good, although we can't see you. A little big.
A lot big. I'm starting again in fingering weight. I think that's going to work much better for me.
Nice. I once knit a hat for, I just knit a hat in a waiting room. I was taking my father-in-law to the doctor, and I just knit, and I ended up with a hat that was so big, we were trying to put it over his ski helmet. And then I shrunk it. I threw it in the washer and the dryer and sold it and donated it to a church fair that they sold it. And I saw it in the wild. It was so much fun. I worked in a library and someone walked in wearing it. It was very fun and rewarding. So don't throw away the big one. You never know. Of the world, but not in it. Yes.
So I just cast on yesterday, sorry. So I am coming up just about coming to the part where I go to stockinette. And I know that when you first started this conversation, you said something about the decreases. Is there anything I need to be aware of? Because I like to fly blind and only read the instructions as I go, generally.
One of the things I ran into from counting as best I could, which clearly has been sort of flawed, was that the decreases seemed to, well, it seemed very clear when I counted that they were every 10, and then you'd go 5 rows, and then they were every 9, and then they were every 8, so on. And one of the test ones I did was with paying no attention to gauge. Every time I did changed a design element, I just picked up a different color so I could see it. And one of the things that was very clear was that the decreases didn't happen evenly, right? So I would get to the end. If I did it every 10, then they wouldn't. And I just kept going. And you still get a hat that's generally the correct shape. And you don't see it. So that's something that you may run into. That didn't worry me so much because I knew I was going to get the shape of a crown that I needed. And I was more worried about, because the original one looks kind of short, I didn't want it to decrease so fast that it felt too short on your head. So I waited until it's once you get to every 5 or every 4 that then you go to every 3 rows before you do another decrease row. And so I might test it on your head or measure it for the head of the designated recipient to make sure you're getting a vertical gauge that allows you to have it fit comfortably. But particularly, and if you're working all in one color, it's going to be fairly invisible if the decreases aren't even. One person has sent me, and I will share all these at the end. They added a Fair Isle stripe. So if you're adding color or a visual element, then it's going to matter that your decreases aren't even, because it'll mess up your pattern that way. But otherwise, I would just make sure it's fitting well as you go.
The only other question I have is, when you finished your hat, did you compare it to the museum piece as far as like the ear flaps, if they were located in the same location or not?
They appear
Okay.
to be. They do.
Okay.
They appear to be.
Okay.
And again, the more, particularly with some people's, you know, the ear flaps ending up in strange places, I really suspect that the hat is in a very different condition than it was when it was originally knit. I mean, it doesn't look like it has holes or worn or anything, but I think one of the challenges we're finding is that the gauge has changed. And I have no idea. The original hat was raccoon fur and silk, and I have no idea how that would have behaved with wash and wear over time. Other than it's pretty hardy, like it doesn't look like it hasn't worn thin, there aren't any holes in it, but I suspect it shrunk. Ellen has shared with us that she knit her hat on 2.75 millimeter needles with 2 strands of light fingering, and it's a smaller hat with a firm fabric, which will hit quite high on her head as in the museum mannequin. And I think that the ear flaps will hit in the right place. So that is great.
I have a bachelor's in mathematics, and I wanted to share that when you're decreasing, let me think, 146, knit 9, knit 2 together, you're decreasing from 11 stitches to 10 stitches 13 times. Now, if right before you start your decreases, if you decrease down from 146 to 143, that's 11 times 13, and all of your decreases will line up.
Beautiful. Thank you.
In that case, what I might do is I added 2, so my ribbing would be, you know.
Yeah.
And so maybe I'll just decrease 2 before I get to that point, you know.
I would decrease 5 if you want your decreases to come out. 13 decreases every so often, evenly spaced.
Okay.
Yeah, because my first hat, I started with the same number of stitches as you. And it came out very large. It's going, if it doesn't fit my son-in-law, it's going to some homeless person on the street who would be very happy to have a wool hat.
Absolutely. Even when I knit sweaters for my children, I say, if you're not going to wear it, hand it to somebody in the subway. Let's give them, somebody should stay warm by all means.
Mm-hmm. No, I work for a nonprofit organization that distributes lunches to the homeless, so that I know exactly where to give it.
That is very nice. Very nice. I once discovered when I was teaching knitting to middle schoolers, there's an organization called Warm Up America, and they have a neat website. And if you're ever wanting to know what to do with your swatches, or you're interested in putting together a community group, they will assemble. You can send them boxes and boxes of swatches, and they'll assemble blankets and distribute them.
Oh, could you repeat what that was? There used to be a similar project for Pine Ridge Reservation, but the woman running it stopped. So I'm always looking for a new spot.
Warm Up America?
Warm Up
America. Thank you.
And then I think the last thing I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and put in the chat if I can find it, the link to our YouTube channel in case you want to share it with any friends who may have missed it and been interested. So that is there. And then we're going to wrap up, but I would be remiss if I didn't invite you all to visit our website at shakermuseum.us, where you can learn all about Shakers. We are in the middle of our annual appeal, and memberships and donations are what keep us going and help us be able to do this kind of programming. So I hope if you are able, you will consider joining us. And then we'll be back in December for our last meeting, where we would love to see everybody's hats. And if you'd like to email me a picture of your hat, and and an address. Anybody who completes a hat by the last meeting, we'd love to share with you a little Shaker Museum tote bag. So we'd love to be in touch. But thank you all very much for your feedback, and I hope you enjoy your knitting, and we'll see you in a few weeks.
Susie, one last
Yes.
question.
Sure.
Sorry. Can I hybridize the brim, like alter the brim, or do you really want us to stick with
You
the
may
pattern?
do. This is a knit along in which we are offering what we have learned from our collection, and hope that you will take it and make it your own in any way you like.
Okay,
So,
thanks.
by all means, we just love to see it and hope you have a good time.
Oh,
So,
I had a question. If you
Sure.
also have the mittens, was that last year or earlier?
sure. Yes, we've had 2 patterns previously, and many people have asked, and I've been sending them out.
Ah,
So if you have not received those, but you would like them, I sort of don't want to spam everybody's inbox and send them things they don't want. So if you email me at sharding@shakermuseum.us, I will be happy to send you the previous patterns. And let me
fabulous.
see
All
if
right,
I
thank
can-
you.
Sure, I'll put my email down here in case anybody needs it.
I have a friend in my knitting group who brought back possum yarn at one point
fun.
from Australia. So I'm hoping if I can see if she has any scraps to compare
That would be really neat.
to raccoon.
Very cool. Very cool. Possums are underappreciated. So because they're neat things.
The
But-
possum yarn that we're talking about is not from the American marsupial. It is a completely different animal.
Yes, I am aware. I
Yeah.
just
Right.
figured
I
as
was
a
telling
Is that
Susie.
in
small,
Australia?
New Zealand, they're an invasive
New Zealand.
species destroying the forests in New Zealand. So they're actually have a program to eradicate them, but they've found a way to harvest the fiber post mortem, and at least have some good come out of the.
Yes,
But
absolutely.
yeah, it's a completely different species from the American opossum.
That is fascinating.
but it did seem to be similar to the way it was described, harvesting sort of the undercoat rather than the outer fur.
Hmm.
And that and silk. So thought it was just interesting.
It is very interesting. It is indeed. So, all right. Well, thank you, everybody. Happy knitting.
Thank you,
so much.
Susie.
Ciao.
See you soon. Take care. Bye-bye.
Bye.